the movement toward a society that is not corrupt. Now, I remember just a few years ago, the Occupy movement on the left and the Tea Party movement on the right were saying much the same. They were talking about corporate welfare, about money going to big corporations because those corporations had a great deal of political power. And who was it who in 2014, 2015, 2016 began to point all this out and began to attract a lot of support? Because they were pointing out corruption, because they sounded and felt like they were outside the system, and people were attracted to people who were outside the system. Well, there were two politicians who kept on coming up. When I would go out and talk to labor union leaders and people who had been in unions and people who I'd met 30 years before when I was labor secretary, who did I hear constantly brought up? Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. It is no accident. If you don't see the history, if you don't understand the frustrations, if you don't understand the anger, if you don't see the gap between our goals, our ideals, and the reality, then all of this seems surprising. It's not surprising. These people don't come from nowhere. What we're facing today is a consequence of where we were. So, I'm going to ask you, overall, when I'm being very honest with myself, I'm A, pessimistic about the future of America and the world, although I'm optimistic about my own future, or B, I'm optimistic about the future of America and the world, although I'm pessimistic about my own future, or C, I'm pessimistic about both. Go. Most of you say that you are pessimistic about the future of America and the world, although you are optimistic about your own future, and the next largest group of you are pessimistic about both. Pessimism is fine. Cynicism is not. There is a difference. The arc of the universe, of the moral universe, is long, but it bends toward justice. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. told us. It's not that simple. Leadership and positive social change. Every one of the movements that I described for you, showed you photos of, was marked by and led by people who understood something. And I want to just spend a couple of minutes on what they understood. Now, there's a great deal of confusion about what leadership actually means, and it's a word that we use all the time, but we use it in very fundamental ways. There's a myth of the natural born leader. We say, well, he or she or they are natural. They just came that way. They always had that kind of quality of charisma. They always had the ability to mobilize. Let me be very clear, because I have spent over 60 years with people who were leaders, some of them formal leaders, some of them informal leaders, They were not born that way. There is not a leadership gene. There are not natural-born leaders. Leadership comes from somewhere else. There's also this notion that if you have a lot of followers, and I don't mean on social media, although that could be one place where you have followers, but if you've got a lot of followers, you are by definition a leader. I mean, a leader has followers. So anybody who has a huge number of followers is, by this crazy reductionist definition, a leader. But that drains any moral concept from the notion of leadership. Adolf Hitler was a leader. He had a lot of followers. Mussolini, Stalin. And you could go through the list of some of the worst people in the world, in the history of the world, who had a lot of followers, but they had no leadership in the moral sense of the term, which I want to get to in a moment. And then there's also the leadership myth that you have to have formal authority. You've got to be a president, or you've got to be a cabinet member, or you've got to be a member of Congress, or whatever drapes you in authority. Well, stop right there. Some of the most important leaders in world history have had no formal authority at all. Mahatma Gandhi comes to mind immediately. Martin Luther King, Jr. Many of the others who did change the arc of the universe, they had no formal office or authority. So that can't be it either. Well, what is it? Is there a moral definition of leadership? Going back to what I talked about, the three elements of social change, that is, you have ideals, a society has ideals, and there is a gap between the ideal and reality that's widely understood, and people then feel efficacious in terms of doing something about that gap. Leadership is helping people do the hard work of making positive social change, overcoming work avoidance. Now, let me just say something about work avoidance. All of us, if we're human, are going to be avoiding certain kinds of work. Now, let me make that quite clear. You see homeless people, and you immediately, if you're human, put up a work avoidance mechanism, because you cannot be human and be receiving so much that is so difficult to accept. Your friend, your best friend, has a major problem. Let's say it's a problem with his girlfriend, or an eating disorder, or a problem with her parents, or their sister is dying, or whatever it is. You want to be helpful, but you also have to set some boundaries. Setting boundaries in terms of not doing the work of responding to every single need that is out there is necessary. But a leader, a true leader, will help people overcome their work avoidance mechanisms with regard to critically important work that needs to be done if a society is going to survive. A leader will help people overcome four, and they are four major work avoidance mechanisms. The first work avoidance mechanism, denial. There is not global warming. There is not widening inequality. My friend doesn't need my help. A leader will help people overcome their denial so that they are capable of doing the work that needs to be done. For example, Martin Luther King Jr., and again, I'm old enough to remember in the 50s, there was huge denial. In fact, there was denial mostly in the North. You know, I lived in northern New York State, and we heard that there was prejudice and bigotry around, and it was in the South. And we said, well, it was in the South, and it's not really there. But black people in the South are not really that bad off. I mean, we just used whatever excuses we could for not participating, for not getting involved. And Martin Luther King, what he did over and over again was he said to us, through demonstrations, through showing what sheriffs and Ku Klux Klan members were doing to black people in the South, but other places as well, he showed us the brutality, the stark immorality of racism. He educated us. He got us working. Not all of us, but some of us. Or to take another example, and this is somebody who I knew, was a friend, Betty Friedan. Some of you may have heard of her, but she began the National Organization of Women. She was a marvelously effective advocate for women's rights, the Equal Rights Amendment. She was not only visible, but she was an educator. She helped us overcome our denial. Those of us who said, women are fine, women have already got, they have the right to vote, women now, they have the right to do so many other things, there's not a problem. She, Betty Friedan, overcame that denial. We, not all of us by any stretch of the imagination, but enough of us began doing the work that was necessary to deliver more equal rights to women. Avoidance mechanism number two, people can say, look, I'm not denying, I'm not in denial, I understand global warming is a problem, I understand that inequality is widening, I get it, I know my friends have certain issues and needs, but it doesn't affect me or anybody I love. I can escape from it. The true leader helps people overcome their escapism. The true leader says, in effect, you cannot escape from global climate change. You can't escape from it. You can have the best air conditioning system, you can have the best system of fire prevention, you can have a lot of insurance. You cannot escape. It affects you.